Hello. Hello. Good afternoon all. I'm Dr. Sanjog Gajbee from Department of Neurosurgery, Super Speciality Hospital and GMCH Nagpur. I'll be delivering a lecture on subarachnoid hemorrhage as a part of the National Medical College Network. This lecture has been prepared under the guidance of Dr. Pramod Giri sir. Subarachnoid hemorrhage is defined as extravasation of blood in the subarachnoid spaces between the pia and the arachnoid membrane. The annual incidence, the global annual incidence of subarachnoid hemorrhage is about 10 per 1 lakh population. It is relatively a less common a condition, but it has high rates of mortality and morbidity. Therefore, early diagnosis, prompt and efficient management form the pillars of the management to reduce mortality and morbidity of this condition. Relevant anatomy. Arachnoid originates from two words, arachne plus idios, which are of Greek origin. Arachne means spider web, idios means resemblance. Therefore, arachnoid is a spongy tissue which has trabeculae plus intercommunication channels which resemble a spider web, and these contain CSF. The subarachnoid space extends from basal system superiorly to the S2 level inferiorly, and it forms an interface between the vascular tissue and the CSF. The management of subarachnoid hemorrhage has evolved in last 3 to 4 decades, but the historical perspective dates back to 1937 when Dandy first successfully clipped the aneurysm using vascular clip designed by Sir Harvey Cushing. In 1951, Ecker and Riemann described angiographic vasospasm. In 1960s, Poole, Maspes and Marini et al. Described clinical vasospasm. Serbinko pioneered the endovascular treatment of intracranial aneurysms at Moscow Institute of Neurosurgery in 1970s. In 1976, Kostnik and Hunt, followed by Kazel, described the effectiveness of induced hypertension and intravascular volume expansion in delayed ischemic neurological deficit. 1983, Alan et al. Published the first controlled trial of nimodipine. In 1990, Guglielmi developed GDC, that is Guglielmi detachable coils, which are platinum coils and are the main pillars of endovascular treatment, which is going on today. And this was developed as University of California, Los Angeles Medical Center. Coming to the epidemiology, overall incidence is 9 to 10.5 per 1 lakh population every year. The highest incidence is seen in Japan and Finland. France and China show lower incidences. In India, the hospital-based data shows 3 to 4 cases per 1 lakh patients annually. The sex ratio for subarachnoid hemorrhage is 1:1.24, meaning that women show a bit more preponderance of subarachnoid hemorrhage. It is common, subarachnoid hemorrhage is more common in Hispanics and blacks as compared to whites. Below the age of 50 years, the incidence is similar in men and women, but beyond 50 years, the incidence is higher in women. The case fatality rate is 50%. Initially, it was about 70 to 80%, but now due to the technical advances in actual management and the post-op critical care, the case fatality rate has decreased to 50%. This also includes about 10 to 15 patients who die before receiving the medical care. Etiology. Etiology of SAH has an exhaustive list. The most common is being trauma. Trauma is the most commonest cause globally, resulting in subarachnoid hemorrhage. But of more neurosurgical interest are the vascular causes, that is, the intracranial ruptured aneurysms, which form the commonest non-traumatic cause, followed by arteriovenous malformations, tumors with hemorrhage, tumors like high-grade glioma, meningioma, hemangioblastoma, choroid plexus papilloma, sarcoma, and pituitary apoplexy also forms one of the neurosurgically treatable causes of subarachnoid hemorrhage. Other causes are vasculopathy like collagen vascular disease, amyloid angiopathy, arterial dissection, hematological causes like anticoagulant therapy, leukemia, hepatic and renal coagulopathy. Drug use like cocaine, amphetamine, ephedrine form the medical causes of subarachnoid hemorrhage. Infections like bacterial, tubercle, fungal meningitis, herpes, yellow fever and dengue. Those viral fevers which have thrombocytopenia also form an important cause of subarachnoid hemorrhage. Toxins like morphine, nicotine, lead, phosphorus, these are the less common causes of subarachnoid hemorrhage. The risk factors for subarachnoid hemorrhage: smoking, hypertension, heavy alcohol consumption form the definitive risk factors. They definitely increase the risk of subarachnoid hemorrhage. In pregnancy, the risk of aneurysmal rupture as well as the AVM rupture is definitely higher. It is proven that it is higher in which results in subarachnoid hemorrhage. It is attributed to the hemodynamic changes that take place in pregnancy. The doubtful risk factors are use of OCPs, hormone replacement therapy, hypercholesterolemia, and increasing age. Subarachnoid hemorrhage, the pathogenesis can be mainly divided into two categories. One is aneurysmal subarachnoid hemorrhage, other is non-aneurysmal subarachnoid hemorrhage. As mentioned earlier, smoking, alcohol, hypertension, connective tissue diseases like Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, Marfan syndrome, polycystic kidney disease, fibromuscular dysplasia lead to decreased endothelial integrity. Sickle cell disease, Vidarbha region is a predominant sickle cell belt. So this disease is a common factor for subarachnoid hemorrhage in this region. Then congenital AVM. They also have abnormal blood flow. Combination of decreased endothelial integrity and abnormal blood flow result in development of saccular aneurysms, which further can rupture and lead to aneurysmal subarachnoid hemorrhage. Physical exertion, sympathomimetic drugs, cocaine, amphetamines, caffeine, acute anger, any action that leads to acute increase in the blood pressure result in increased stress on the intracerebral vessel endothelium, which further precipitate the rupture of saccular aneurysm. Other factors like relative or a history with subarachnoid hemorrhage, estrogen deficiency, previous blood transfusion, decreased BMI, they have also been attributed to increased occurrences of subarachnoid hemorrhage, but the mechanism is unknown. Half of the subarachnoid hemorrhage occurs during non-strenuous activity, that is in sleep. Identifiable trigger is seen only in 50% of subarachnoid hemorrhage. Roughly 20% of subarachnoid hemorrhage occur without pre-existing aneurysm. Trauma can precipitate a rupture of pre-existing aneurysm. However, more than 50% of ruptured aneurysms have no history of trauma. Coming to pathogenesis of non-aneurysmal subarachnoid hemorrhage, AVMs have abnormal blood flow. They result in endothelial damage, and so they can cause direct bleeding from AVM, which can result in subarachnoid hemorrhage. AVMs have also are known to be associated with aneurysms. Physical exertion raises intrathoracic pressure, decreases jugular venous return, increases the cerebral venous pressure, and this leads to venous blood leakage from susceptible vessels. This is a common mechanism for perimesencephalic subarachnoid hemorrhage. Then trauma, cervical or a head, can result into injury and tearing of the intimal mesenchymal layer of the basilar artery, followed by dissection of the medial layer, and rupture and bleeding through the adventitia layer. This is a mode of pseudoaneurysm bleed resulting in subarachnoid hemorrhage. There is also a term called occult aneurysmal subarachnoid hemorrhage, which forms about 5 to 10% of the cases. The pathophysiology of subarachnoid hemorrhage. The ruptured intracranial aneurysm results in extravasation of blood with it under high pressure in the subarachnoid space, resulting in subarachnoid hemorrhage, which further results in transient global ischemia and early brain injury. The early brain injury triggers microcirculatory constriction, also known as vasospasm. Then it also causes disruption of the blood-brain barrier and also causes endothelial cell apoptosis. There is impaired autoregulation. Autoregulation is a process by which the cerebral perfusion pressure is maintained to ensure that is adequate, the brain is getting adequate blood flow. But this autoregulation is impaired in SAH. Also, there is cerebral edema. At a molecular level, there is excitotoxicity. The excitable neurotransmitters like glutamate, they are released and they cause ion channel dysfunction, thrombin activation. There is increase in oxidative stress, neuroinflammation, increase in MMPs, and altered nitric oxide. Nitric oxide is a potent vasodilator. It is inhibited due to all these factors, which results in persistent vasoconstriction. A ruptured aneurysm most commonly presents with subarachnoid hemorrhage. It is also associated with intracerebral hematoma in about 20 to 30 cases, and it sometimes also presents as subdural hematoma. The release or the sudden release of blood in the subarachnoid space causes hypothalamic injury, which further causes sympathetic hyperactivity, increased catecholamines, increased natriuretic peptides, increased renin-angiotensin system, and inflammatory cytokines. These all neurotransmitters and these all chemical events result in pulmonary edema, then acute respiratory distress syndrome, cardiac arrhythmias is also called as neurogenically stunned myocardium or stress-induced cardiomyopathy. Also, it affects the contractibility and increases the systemic inflammatory response. The clinical presentations of subarachnoid hemorrhage. Headache is the commonest form of presentation of subarachnoid hemorrhage. Headache is described as sudden, severe onset headache, thunderclap headache, classically described as worst headache of the life. It is acute in onset, peaks rapidly, wakes up the patient from sleep, and persists for many days. Often the headache is holocranial, associated with nausea, vomiting, dizziness. The dizziness is mainly due to the vasospasm of the brainstem perforators. Also, there is a warning headache. Warning headache means it is a headache with lesser intensity, also called as sentinel headache, occurs in about 30 to 60% of presentations, and it can also precede a actual rupture headache by weeks to months. Then after subarachnoid hemorrhage, there are about 75% of presentations which show signs of meningeal irritation, which is neck stiffness, Kernick sign, Brudzinski sign, low back pain, bilateral leg pain. These signs take about 6 hours to 12 hours to occur, and these are predominantly seen in the clinical practice in the wards. Loss of consciousness, 45% of cases have transient loss of consciousness, about 10% are comatose, and these comatose patients remain in a comatose condition for about 1 to 2 weeks or 2 to 3 weeks, depending on the severity of the aneurysmal bleed. Then there are visual symptoms, photophobia, blurring of vision, loss of vision. The various aneurysms, various location aneurysms can attribute to these visual symptoms. Anterior communicating artery aneurysm, ophthalmic aneurysm, Superior hypophyseal segment aneurysms, they have close proximity to the optic nerve. So they may compress the optic nerve, which can result in loss of vision. A posterior communicating artery aneurysm has proximity towards the third nerve. So they may present as partial third nerve palsy or a complete third nerve palsy, resulting in ipsilateral pupillary dilatation and ptosis. There is a condition called Terson syndrome. In this, subarachnoid hemorrhage causes raised intracranial pressure, which causes the central retinal vein compression. Compression of this vein results in venous disruption and then further results in vitreous hemorrhage, leading to vision loss. Then subarachnoid hemorrhage can also present as focal neurological abnormalities due to vasospasm, seizures and hematoma. There is hemiparesis, hemiplegia, which are usually seen in MCA aneurysms or perforator vasospasm. MCA is supplying the motor strip and the perforators of MCA also supply the internal capsule. So if MCA aneurysms are there is rupture of MCA aneurysms or perforator vasospasm, the hemiparesis or hemiplegia is localized in subarachnoid hemorrhage. Then there is aphasia, cranial nerve palsies, memory loss. About 20 to 30 patients also show memory loss in subarachnoid hemorrhage. ACA aneurysm, that is anterior cerebellar aneurysms, result in paraparesis or paraplegia since they supply the correlating functional area of the frontal lobe. How do we grade SAH? Clinical grading of SAH, Hunt and Hess is the commonest and the oldest method to grade subarachnoid hemorrhage based on clinical signs. It was developed by Hunt and Hess, two neurosurgeons, in 1968. In this grading, unruptured aneurysm is attributed as 0 grade, asymptomatic, mild headache or slight nuchal rigidity is attributed grade 1, which has about 22% of vasospasm. Cranial nerve palsies like third nerve palsy, sixth nerve palsy, moderate to severe headache, nuchal rigidity are seen in grade 2. Mild focal neurological deficits, lethargy or confusion are seen in grade 3. Stupor, moderate to severe hemiparesis, early decerebrate rigidity is seen in grade 4, which has about 53% of risk of vasospasm. And grade 5 is attributed to deep coma, decerebrate rigidity, moribund appearance, and the risk is about 73%. The original Hunt and Hess classification had a modification of addition of grade 0, which means unruptured aneurysm. Grade 1A is no acute meningeal reaction but with fixed neurodeficits. For every comorbidity like diabetes mellitus, hypertension, COPD, atherosclerosis, angiographic vasospasm, 1 grade is added. Then there is a WFNS scale, World Federation of Neurosurgical Society scale, which incorporates a combination of Glasgow Coma scale and focal deficits to grade the subarachnoid hemorrhage. In this, 0 grade is again the original WFNS scale. 0 does not have any focal deficits and GCS is 15 by 15. Grade 1, the GCS is 15 without focal deficit. Grade 2, the GCS is decreased 13 to 14, but still there is no focal deficit. Focal deficits occur in grade 3 with a GCS of 13 to 14. Grade 4 and grade 5 subsequently, GCS decreases irrespective of the focal deficit. The focal deficits are defined as aphasia, hemiparesis, hemiplegia, and grade 0 is as told previously is an intact aneurysm. The diagnostic modalities, CT scan is the most common modality used in all centers as a first investigation of suspected subarachnoid hemorrhage. It has 93% of sensitivity in first 48 hours of ictus, 80% in 74 hours of ictus, 50% in 1 week. Few falsely negative cases are seen in small hemorrhages and severe anemia. Uh, the pattern of bleed on CT scan can also let us know the probable source of rupture. So if there is bleed predominantly in the anterior interhemispheric fissure and the suprasellar substance, it is more commonly seen due to ACOM aneurysm or a distal anterior cerebral artery aneurysm. Then if the bleed is mainly seen in Sylvian fissure, the probable source is MCA aneurysm or a PCOM aneurysm. Then bleed in a third ventricle or fourth ventricle can be localized to a pica aneurysm, vertebral artery aneurysm or basilar artery aneurysm. Convexities or parenchymal bleed, they are mainly seen in AVM or mycotic aneurysm. Now this is a CT scan. First we'll see the normal CT scan, which on the right side. There we see the suprasellar area with a normal iso or hypodense signal, which is the signal of a cerebrospinal fluid in the subarachnoid space. But in case of a subarachnoid hemorrhage, we see a star-shaped pattern with a hyperdense signal. This is a classical sign of subarachnoid hemorrhage, which is due to the presence of blood, acute blood in subarachnoid space. CT grading of subarachnoid hemorrhage is a more quantitative analysis, and it was first described by Fisher. The original Fisher grading had 4 grades. Grade 1 is no detectable blood on CT. Grade 2 is diffuse thin subarachnoid hemorrhage with the vertical length or the vertical thickness is being less than 1 millimeter. Grade 3 was a localized clot or a thick SH with vertical layer thickness more than 1 millimeter thickness. Grade 4 was intraventricular or intracerebral clot with diffuse or no SH. This Fisher grading was modified, and then it was correlated to the risk of vasospasm. As the grading increases, the risk of vasospasm also increases. Grade 0 is no subarachnoid hemorrhage or no IVH with a very low risk of vasospasm. Grade 1 and 2 are focal or diffuse thin layers of SH. In grade 1, the IVH is absent. Grade 2, intraventricular hemorrhage is present. In grade 3 and grade 4, there is a diffuse or a focal thick layer of subarachnoid hemorrhage in which IVH is absent in grade 3 and IVH is present in grade 4. Grade 4 has a very high risk of vasospasm to the tune of about 40 to 50%. This CT scans show the various gradings in of Fisher scale. So the first CT scan is grade 1 with a thin SH. Grade 2 is thin SH with IVH. We can see the bleed in the lateral horns and in the fourth ventricle as well as in the body of the lateral ventricles. In grade 3, there is thick SH. We can see thick star-shaped bleed pattern along without any intraventricular hemorrhage. And grade 4 is thick SH with intraventricular hemorrhage. Then other diagnostic modalities are magnetic resonance imaging. It is not as sensitive for SH in the first 48 hours. It is better after 4 to 7 days, but it has its own practical difficulties due to longer times and not easily being available at common treatable centers. In MRI per se, GRE and FLAIR sequences are more sensitive for acute SH. Lumbar puncture, it is one of the most traditional and most sensitive tests to diagnose subarachnoid hemorrhage. But before doing lumbar puncture for subarachnoid hemorrhage, prior CT scan has to be done to rule out intracranial mass effect, obstructive hydrocephalus, intracranial hematoma, so as to prevent cerebral tonsillar herniation after lumbar puncture. It is more sensitive after 12 hours of bleed, but it is important to distinguish a traumatic tap from a subarachnoid tap. The table shows differences between these two taps. The RBC count decreases with sequential tubes in a traumatic tap, while in SH, the RBC count is constant with every tap. The clotting in traumatic tap, the there are clots in the tap. In subarachnoid hemorrhage, the tap does not clot. There is xanthogomia present in SAH. RBC to WBC ratio is normal in traumatic tap, while it is decreased in SAH. CSF fluid pressure is normal in traumatic tap, while it is elevated in SAH, which is due to the raised ICP. Repeat tap at another level will result mostly in a normal tap in case of traumatic taps. Otherwise in subarachnoid hemorrhage, it is always consistent with an SAH. Angiography is the gold standard for diagnosing and further treatment in subarachnoid hemorrhage. There are various types of angiography. Most predominant and the gold standard is digital subtraction angiography, which has about 80 to 85% sensitivity. In DSA, the cerebrovascular anatomy is delineated to the best possible detail. Therefore, it is the gold standard. The location and the source of bleeding can be identified. The features of aneurysm like size, shape, orientation of dome and neck, relation to the parent perforating arteries are seen very easily in DSA. Also, the other causes of SAH like AVM are very clearly delineated on DSA. If on first DSA the aneurysm or AVM is not detected, it is advisable to do a repeat DSA after 3 to 4 weeks interval. Other forms of angiography like MRA are less useful. They can detect about more than 3 mm of aneurysm with a sensitivity of 86% and false positivity of 16%. But in acute setting, it is not possible and it is not advisable as well. CT angiography, on the other hand, has a higher sensitivity for more than 3 mm aneurysms, and 3D reconstruction of the aneurysm gives us sufficient detail, anatomic detail related to the bone, and which helps in planning the surgery and type of approach. Transcranial Doppler, it is a useful modality to detect monitoring of the arterial vasospasm rather than detecting the aneurysm. The surgical complications of subarachnoid hemorrhage, rebleeding is the most important cause of early death after aneurysm rupture. Risk factors for rebleeding are poor clinical grade, high blood pressure, short interval from subarachnoid hemorrhage to admission, large aneurysm size, intracerebral hemorrhage, and IVH. Mortality rate is more than 75% in cases of rebleed, and the highest chance of rebleed is on the first day or within the first 2 weeks of aneurysmal rupture. Early clipping and endovascular intervention is associated with better outcome. Hydrocephalus, post-SAH, acute hydrocephalus is seen in about 20% of cases. The risk factors are increasing age, pre-existing or operative hypertension, intraventricular hemorrhage, more or thicker SAH, posterior circulation aneurysms due to their proximity to the ventricle, use of antifibrinolytic drugs, hyponatremia, worsening clinical grade. In case of acute hydrocephalus, a conscious 15/15 patient can deteriorate immediately, in case we require to do an emergency CSF diversion, which may be in the form of a EVD tap or a Omeya reservoir insertion or a ventricular peritoneal shunt. The CT scan shows a classic acute hydrocephalus in setting of a subarachnoid hemorrhage. We can see a star-shaped pattern of subarachnoid bleed in the suprasellar system. Lateral to them, we can see there's dilatation of the temporal horns as indicated by the thick black arrows, and the dilatation of the fourth ventricle as well. On the right side, the thin arrow is pointing towards the ballooned or enlarged third ventricle, and we can see there is gross cerebral edema as well. Other common complications are intraventricular hemorrhage, aneurysms of ACOM and basilar artery and pica are mainly responsible for IVH. The CT scan shows intraventricular bleed, which is seen in form of hyperdense signal in the third ventricle as well as the occipital horns. The mortality in case of IVH is up to 64%. Seizures are also commonly seen. About 20 to 25% of cases show through seizures in SAH. Urgent CT scan has to be done to look for rebleed, ischemia, rebleed and ischemia, which can precipitate seizures. Other causes of seizures are hypernatremia. Then there is vasospasm. Vasospasm is itself an big entity which can be described under clinical vasospasm, radiographic vasospasm, and symptomatic vasospasm. Vasospasm is defined as prolonged reversible narrowing of cerebral arteries after SAH. The types are clinical vasospasm, in which the signs and the clinical signs and symptoms correspond to the vasospasm, also known as delayed ischemic neurological deficit. Radiographic vasospasm is defined when the vasospasm is demonstrated on cerebral angiography. About 30 to 70% of cases can be detected by DSA, which when it is done around 7th day of SH. Then there is symptomatic vasospasm, in which the delayed ischemic neurological deficit corresponds to the region and the timing of vasospasm, which is seen in about 20 to 30% of cases. Then time course. The vasospasm usually sets after onset of subarachnoid hemorrhage, mainly on the 4th to 5th day. It is seen around 10 to 12 days, and by 12th day or 14th day of SH, the clinical vasospasm starts decreasing, whereas the radiographic vasospasm still persists. Hunt and Hess grade on admission and the Fisher grade, as described earlier, correlate progressively with increased risk of vasospasm. The pathogenesis of vasospasm, subarachnoid hemorrhage results in release of vasoconstrictors like endothelin, which cause G protein activation of phospholipases. Phospholipases then hydrolyze the phospholipids, which increase calcium, increase intracellular calcium, cause protein degradation, and result in sustained vasoconstriction. Other vasoconstrictors like oxyhemoglobin also cause increased free radicals, resulting in calcium influx, and cause inhibition of CA-ATPase, and cause vasoconstriction due to smooth muscle contraction. Free radicals also result in lipid peroxidation, which again further triggers activation of phospholipases. There are many theories and risk factors described for vasospasm. Structural theory, proliferative vasculopathy, immune vasculopathy, vessel wall inflammation, extracellular lattice contraction. The technical details of these theories are beyond the scope of this lecture. The vasoconstrictor theory, as defined in the previous slide, result in free radical lipid peroxidation, derangement of the eicosanoids production, nitric oxide deficit, endothelian excess, and then many neurogenic factors which lead to persistent vasoconstriction. The risk factors for vasospasm are quite logical: thick subarachnoid clots, intraventricular hematoma, persistent subarachnoid clots, poor neurological condition on admission, loss of consciousness associated with rupture, history of cigarette smoking, pre-existing hypertension, diabetes mellitus, and cocaine use. The clinical features, it has non-localizing and localizing findings. Non-localizing signs are new or increasing headache, alterations in level of consciousness, disorientation, and signs of meningismus. Localizing signs are cranial nerve palsies, focal motor deficits, then anterior cerebral artery syndrome, in which if there is vasospasm of anterior cerebral artery syndrome, there are mainly frontal lobe signs. Bilateral anterior cerebral artery distribution infarcts are usually due to vasospasm following an ACOM artery aneurysm rupture. Middle cerebral artery syndrome is due to vasospasm of the MCA and results in hemiparesis, monoparesis, and aphasia. The incidence of vasospasm is higher in distribution of ACA rather than that of MCA. What are the causes of delayed deterioration after subarachnoid hemorrhage? These conditions also mimic vasospasm. These are increased edema surrounding hematomas, contusion or infarcts, rebleeding of aneurysms or aneurysmal remnant, hydrocephalus, infection, including ventriculitis, electrolyte abnormalities like hyponatremia, then respiratory abnormalities like hypoxia, cortical spreading depression, and cerebral vasospasm causing cerebral ischemia. How do you diagnose vasospasm? It is detectable neurological worsening. The deficits are referable to the ischemic territory as described previously as ACA syndrome or MCA syndrome. You have to rule out all other causes of delayed deterioration. Transcranial Doppler. In transcranial Doppler, there is high probability of detecting a large artery vasospasm with velocities of more than 200 centimeters per second. Then vascular imaging, catheter-based angiography, that is DSA or CT angiography, is also helpful in diagnosing vasospasm. The image shown here, there is vasospasm of the MCA as shown by delayed filling or less filling as compared to the other vessels. This is a DSA image. Transcranial Doppler, it is a non-invasive method which semi-quantitatively measures the velocity of blood flow in middle cerebral artery through the skull. This is measured through the thinner regions of skull bone, that is the temporal regions, also known as insufflation windows, and they utilize ultrasound phase shift mechanism. Narrowing of arterial lumen as occurs in vasospasm is known to elevate the blood flow velocity. Therefore, when there are changes detected in the velocity of the blood flow, we can diagnose vasospasm. Daily increases of more than 50 centimeter per second may suggest vasospasm. There is less correlation between velocities and vasospasm in anterior cerebral arteries because they are difficult. There are no insufflation windows to diagnose anterior cerebral artery vasospasm. Lindegaard's ratio is blood flow velocity of the middle cerebral artery divided by the blood flow velocity in the internal carotid artery on the same side. The Lindegaard ratio less than 3 is seen in normal cases, while a ratio more than 3 is defined as vasospasm. A Lindegaard ratio of 3 to 6 is defined as mild vasospasm, and more than 6 in which the mean velocity in MCA is more than 200. The result is diagnosed as severe vasospasm. The other ancillary tests for vasospasm are EEG, in which decline in percent of alpha activity predicts vasospasm. There are MRI sequences like diffusion and perfusion weighted MRI, which may detect ischemia. Pathologic reductions in CBF, that is cerebral blood flow, are detected by perfusion, CT scan and SPECT, xenon, enhanced CT, thermal diffusion flowmetry. These are our higher grade, higher technologies and are not readily available in all the centers. Cerebral ischemia is detected by diffusion weighted MRI, near infrared spectroscopy, microdialysis, direct probe cerebral oximetry, and jugular venous oxygen concentration. This is the list of medical and systemic complications. Metabolic complications form one of the most commonest causes of deterioration in subarachnoid hemorrhage. They are mainly hyponatremia. It could be SIDH or cerebral salt wasting. It could be hypernatremia, diabetes insipidus, metabolic alkalosis, acidosis, hypocalcemia, hypomagnesemia. Then pulmonary complications like hypoxemia, respiratory alkalosis, respiratory acidosis, pulmonary thromboembolism. Drug-related complications like corticosteroid psychosis, sedative overdose, alcohol withdrawal, and other drug reactions. Cardiovascular complications like hypotension, hypertension, arrhythmias, decreased contractibility, systemic infection, hepatic and renal failure. Management of SAH, as if we receive a patient with clinical signs of subarachnoid hemorrhage in the casualty or in the OPD, the first the workup of on admission is, first we have to do a plain CT scan to detect the presence of SAH, which can be followed by a catheter cerebral angiography. MRA angiography can be done in those patients where CT scan, if CT scan is not available, but that is less likely, and a chest X-ray has to be done. Then there is blood workup, complete blood cell count, platelet count, prothrombin time, PARCH, APTT. The coagulation profile has to be done in case of subarachnoid hemorrhage, because the patient may be having a hidden history of aspirin ingestion as well. Then renal function test, liver function test, urine analysis, and CSF tap or CSF fluid examination can also be done. How do you manage the patient in the ward? On admission of the patient, once these investigations are sent, then we have to monitor the vital signs of the patient, heart rate, blood pressure. Then we have to do a neurological assessment. A meticulous every hour neurological assessment is of extreme importance in managing a subarachnoid hemorrhage. Fluid intake and output every hour. Then we have to maintain the body temperature of the patient. We have to see if the patient is having fever and give adequate antipyretics. Electrolyte imbalances have to be avoided, like hyperglycemia, hypomagnesemia, hypercarbia, hypoxia, hypovolemia, hyponatremia. All these things have to be routinely monitored, and care has to be taken that all these things are within the normal range. Daily body weight should also be measured. Arterial catheter is an invasive way of blood pressure monitoring, which is inserted usually after adequate sedation and anesthesia in all patients for surgery, and then it is left in place post-operatively to monitor or to maintain the blood pressure. Central venous line is usually inserted for fluid management and is required. Foley's urinary catheterization has to be done so as to prevent retention of urine. Nursing care, bed rest is advised until aneurysm is obliterated or until several days from hemorrhage. The head end of the bed is elevated up to 30 to 45 degrees, especially in patients with marginal airway, intubated or ventilated patients. The visitors, there should be restricted visitors, avoidance of unnecessary stimulation. Patients should be preferably kept in a silent, dark or a mildly lighted room. Foley's catheter for poor grade patients or those who are unable to void. Graduated compression stockings or intermittent pneumatic compression devices on lower extremities. Then pharmacologic prophylaxis can be considered after aneurysm repair. Nasogastric tube for intubated patients should be inserted, or a nasoduodenal tube can be inserted to ensure nutritional support if the patient is not able to eat. Medications like acetaminophen, like paracetamol or morphine have to be given to prevent or to keep the pain symptom in check. Intravenous fluids with goals to maintain evolumia. Anticonvulsants have to be started for seizures, not as prophylaxis, but if the patient throws a seizure, a patient has to be given phenytoin. About the loading dose is about 15 to 19 milligram per kg intravenous loading dose, and which is followed by 100 milligram of maintenance doses, intravenous or orally every 8 hours. The other antiepileptics are phenobarbital, levetiracetam, carbamazepine. Stool softeners are given so as to prevent constipation. Constipation also causes increase in ICP, and therefore any process which causes increase in ICP has to be taken care of. Antihypertensives are used to reduce the systolic blood pressure. The blood pressure is maintained around 120 to 150, predominantly within the first 4 days after SH, when the aneurysm is not obliterated. Once the aneurysm is obliterated, the blood pressure can be maintained higher to prevent vasospasm. Labetalol is commonly used to tackle the hypertension, and 200 to 400 milligram orally can be given. Every 2 to 3 hours it can be repeated, but bronchoconstriction or heart block has to be diagnosed, or we have to keep a suspicion of bronchoconstriction or heart block. Then nicardipine or nimodipine can also be given to handle can be given as antihypertensives. Antiemetics are given. Sucralfate or omeprazole is given to reduce the risk of gastrointestinal bleeding. Sedatives such as lorazepam, 1 to 2 milligram every 8 hours are given to prevent agitation. Then calcium channel blockers like nimodipine and difedipine are given mainly to manage vasospasm. Other medical and surgical care has to be taken apart from clipping and endovascular intervention. In case of acute hydrocephalus, ventricular drain can be inserted with monitoring of intracranial pressure. Culture and sensitivity of respiratory secretions, urine, blood, CSF, other sources, if fevers are there. These form the basis of critical care management in post-operative period of subarachnoid hemorrhage. Non-intubated patients should be given oxygen at about 2 to 4 liters per minute. The ruptured aneurysm, which results in subarachnoid hemorrhage, results in release of cytokines like interleukin-1, which result in neuroinflammation and which can be ablated by use of NSAIDs or steroids. Then there is increase in cyclooxygenase and prostacyclins, which also can be aborted by NSAIDs and acetaminophen. Also, the ruptured aneurysm result in release of tumor necrosis factor alpha, which causes microglial infiltration and results in meningismus or signs of meningismal irritation, which also can be tackled by NSAIDs and dexamethasone. The BRANDS trial was a British aneurysm nimodipine trial in which 22 to 33% of incidence of cerebral infarction was seen as compared to placebo. Nimodipine is usually administered 60 mg per orally every 4 hourly and initiated within 96 hours of subarachnoid hemorrhage, and it is continued up to 2 to 3 weeks. It is a calcium channel blocker which block the slow channel of calcium in influx and reduces the contraction of smooth muscles. Prevention of vasospasm, the general measures are endovascular coil repair or surgical repair or surgical clipping of aneurysm results in progressively decreased incidences of vasospasm. Euvolemia has to be maintained, anemia has to be prevented, hyponatremia and other electrolyte imbalances have to be taken care of. Maintain normal to high systemic blood pressure, optimize ventilation and oxygenation, prevent high ICP, prevent increase in raised ICP with external ventricular drainage as and when necessary. Nimodipine has to be given. The promising agents and trials which are going on is nicardipine, clazosentan, which is an endothelin antagonist, nisophenone, and calcium gene-related peptide. Augmentation of subarachnoid clot clearance can be done by clot lysis, lamina terminalis fenestration, lumbar CSF drainage, head shaking. There was one study in Journal of Neurosurgery which described mild shaking of head with administration of intraoperative urokinase so as to wash away or lyse the clots. And this process has resulted in decreased or early lysis of clot, which logically will prevent further vasospasm. What are the common strategies for vasospasm reversal? Triple H therapy, endovascular reversal of vasospasm, intraarterial papaverine administration, percutaneous transluminal balloon angioplasty, intra-aortic balloon counterpolarization, intraventricular nitroprusside. The Triple H therapy is a combination of hypovolemia, hypertension and hemodilution. This is done to improve cardiac output, to improve cerebral perfusion pressure. Hypertension can be induced by vasopressors like noradrenaline, dopamine, dobutamine. Systolic pressure Our target systolic pressure is 160 to 200 millimeter of mercury. Cerebral perfusion pressure is maintained more than 80 millimeter mercury. If ischemia signs persist, which is a sign of persistent vasospasm, then the target systolic BP is raised to 220 millimeter mercury, and the cerebral perfusion pressure is tried to be maintained above 120 millimeter of mercury. In hypovolemia, the target central venous pressure is about 8 to 10 millimeter of mercury. The pulmonary capillary wedge pressure is kept around 14 to 16 millimeter of mercury. Hemodilution, it results from volume expansion, and the target hematocrit is kept about 30, or hemoglobin is kept above 9 gram. Then endovascular reversal of vasospasm, direct pharmacological arterial dilatation can be done by using smooth muscle relaxants like calcium channel blockers. Nimodipine does not counteract vasospasm, but it has shown to improve neurologic outcomes. Nicardipine, endothelium receptor antagonists like clazosentan and ryanodine receptors, dantrolene. This is also known to mediate intracellular calcium release from sarcoplasmic reticulum, one of the few drugs shown to prevent and reverse vasospasm. Magnesium in MASH study, that is use of magnesium sulfate in aneurysmal subarachnoid hemorrhage, did not show any improvement in clinical outcome. Sympatholytics can be used, but it is a technique that is accepted but not predominantly practiced or available at all the centers. Vasodilation by angioplasty is the commonest way of preventing or treating vasospasm or reversing vasospasm. It is feasible only in large cerebral vessels. The risks of procedures include arterial occlusion, arterial rupture, displacement of aneurysm clip, or arterial dissection. Clinical improvement does occur in about 60 to 80% of patients. The improvements occur due to normalization of the vessel diameter, and it results in reversal of the neurological deficits as well. If we just reverse back to few slides, we had seen the middle cerebral artery having vasospasm, and this is an angiographic image which is showing complete normal filling of the middle cerebral artery, which has resulted by endovascular treatment of vasospasm. The criteria for transluminal balloon angioplasty is failure of hypodynamic therapy. For that, rupture aneurysm repair is required. We can do that only after the aneurysm has been coiled or has been repaired. Optimal results are seen when it is performed within 12 hours of onset of symptoms. It may be done immediately post-clipping for vasospasm, and the contraindication is recent cerebral infarction prior to TBA. And for this, prior CT scan or MRI has to be done. Then the recent advances and clinical trials of treatment of vasospasm include oral nimodipine. Oral nimodipine is one of the commonly used drugs to counteract the vasospasm. Conscious One trial had included the study of clazosentan to see whether there is reversal of vasospasm or not. IMASH study and STASH trial in STASH trial, simvastatin was used to see whether there is reversal of vasospasm. Fasodi is a Rho myokinase inhibitor, which is known to, or which is expected to decrease or reverse the vasospasm. Still, there is no definite evidence of its utility. Others are Nicardia pellets, intrathecal thrombolysis, kinetic therapy, lumbar drainage, LUMAS, early drain, and triple H therapy. Thank you.